It's easy to get discouraged and think it's never going to work out.
Knowing that there is a move of God
Welcome to Bible Reasoning. I'm A.K. Richardson. As you can see, I'm not on live tonight. This is, in fact, pre-recorded. I was just out of town and so couldn't do the live program. I will return live July 8th. Now, if you are someone tuning in for the live program, I apologize that it can't be live. You know, I love being live. I love the interaction, as you well know, and the calls. But I wasn't able to do it. And so for that, I apologize. But remember, I will return live July 8th. And tonight, however, even though this is pre-recorded, I think this is going to be a beneficial material for you to review. Now, it concerns this question right here. Did angels actually marry human women, and did they procreate? And as the theory goes, did giants become the offspring of these angel-human marriages? We get our text out of Genesis 6. Well, we're going to take a look at this. And I think there's some good information that needs to be looked over here. And the idea that angels did marry human women and that you had giant offspring, and even that this is where the origin of demons comes from, as many of the theories go. I think this is worthy to look at. I know you're interested in this. Everybody is. A lot of people are asking questions about this. I believe that is the popular idea about that text too, that it was in fact that angels becoming men perhaps, or becoming men and marrying women and procreating and having these special hybrid offspring of giants. I believe that's a popular view, but we're going to take a look at it. Well, I want to remind you about something. Okay, we are live every Thursday, and I'll remind you of that, 7 p.m. Central. Obviously not tonight, if you're watching this as it premieres. Otherwise, we would have the call-in number. It is a call-in program. The number will be up there when we are live, but just remember, July 8th, we will be returning. And in fact, it will be the debate that I have been telling you guys about with Tanner Adams, and it's over Paul's teaching. Does Paul, in his teaching about grace, faith, and works, exclude the possibility that water baptism could be required for salvation? Well, I say, of course, it absolutely does not. I believe it's harmonious with Paul's teaching, but that's what the debate will be about. So it will be on July 8th on this channel, 7 p.m. normal Bible reasoning time, 8 p.m. Eastern. Make sure you tune in for that, okay? Now, so we are asking the question, did angels marry women? And is it in fact the case that the Nephilim, which is translated giants in some translations, are they giant angel offspring? Well, the reality is I think that we can come up with a much better interpretation than that. I mean, honestly. This interpretation right here requires a whole lot of imaginative speculation. And that's what it is, in fact. Let me fix something here. That's what it is, in fact. Once you get down to it, the idea of defending this idea, there is a lot of speculation that just simply is not stated in any text of the Bible. But I believe we can come up with something that is much more biblical and reasonable than this. And when I say come up, I mean simply interpret it the right way. Now, so let's do that. Well, let's go to the text and look over it, and then we'll begin. Okay, so Genesis 6, just read this particular portion. Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim, translated giants, in some cases, were on the earth in those days. And also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those are the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now, I just tell you, admittedly, the text does have some odd language in it, but we're talking about books written in the time of Moses. So their way of speaking isn't always going to be instantly plain to us because they spoke in a language that existed 1,500 years at the point of Moses before Christ or more. So, but I think it's not, if you follow the flow of thought in the context, we can get the right idea. Okay, so what's the idea here? Well, typically the idea is that the sons of God refers to angels, supernatural spirit creatures, and that the daughters of men, of course, are human women. And so we see that these daughters of men married angels. So evidently angels, as the idea goes, became men. And there's other passages where it speaks in Peter where he talks about certain things about the time of Noah, which, again, if you just look at those texts, it doesn't say anything that supports the idea that these were angels becoming men. Peter does mention angels that sin and left their proper domain, but it doesn't say that these were them. It doesn't say that. So that's just not enough to prove the particular theory about this text right here. Now, we find a lot of interest in demons, especially when it comes to the New Testament. But again, the theory goes that these originated from these Nephilim. But again, the text just simply doesn't say that. So anything about reading about demons in the New Testament is just not going to get us to the meaning of this. So can I offer you a better idea? Well, here's what I want to do first. I mean, I think you know the alternative, probably. I believe the most apparent idea is that the sons of God refer to the generally faithful men of the righteous line of Seth. And what's going on here is that they're intermarrying with the corrupted lineage, and it would be corrupted generally, just like the lineage of Seth would be generally faithful. Obviously, there would be exceptions to that. As the two lines began to intermarry, the corruption of the wicked line overtook and influenced the faithfulness of the one, until you got where most of the earth was populated. Obviously, Noah was not, and Noah was from the lineage of Seth. But before we get there, let's look at some of the problems that are actually with this angel marrying women idea. Now, let me say first of all, that the sons of God, if you go to the book of Job, most people will go there and show you how in chapter 1 and 2 that the sons of God refers to angels. Well, that's most likely the case, although it doesn't necessarily say that they were angels, but that's likely. They say, well, you got Satan coming in and out among them. Yes, it doesn't say Satan was an angel, by the way. Now, everybody believes that, but it didn't say that about Satan. Whatever he was, whether even if he was an angel, I mean, he's obviously a created being, but whether he's an angel or not, the Bible never classifies him that way. But nevertheless, even if he's coming in and out among them, even if he is an angel, that doesn't mean the sons of God are. It just doesn't specifically say. But I got no problem saying that those are angels when it refers to the sons of God. But you know what? Humans can be referred to as the sons of God too. You go, when Moses approaches Pharaoh about letting God's people, Israel, go, he says, for God says, let Israel go, he is my firstborn son. They are sons. Even if that isn't the normal way of speaking about humans, it is no doubt a way right there in Exodus. But ultimately it has to deal with the context, what comes before. But what are some of the problems with his angels? Well, let's look at it. Well, the biggest problem is what Jesus actually says about angels. So what does he have to say? Well, if you go to Matthew chapter 22 and verse 29, this is a discussion Jesus has with the Sadducees, who denied that there were angels, who denied that there was such thing as a resurrection, spirits, or angels. It says this in the New Testament, and they're having like a debate, a question that they think stumps him. Now, I'm not all concerned with their issue per se, but just about what Jesus says here. But Jesus answered and said to them, "You are mistaken, not understanding the Scriptures, nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." So what does Jesus tell us right here? That the angels, they do not marry. Now that's pretty powerful right there. Angels do not marry. But wait a minute. Hold the phone. Now I know that some of you out there right now, you're saying, wait a minute. You are not taking into consideration everything Jesus says. He doesn't just say angels, okay? He says the angels in heaven. And you're saying, but you know that in Genesis 6, the angels there are not in heaven. They are most certainly on the earth. They're rebellious. Now, the angels in heaven aren't marrying, but it says nothing about the wicked rebel angels who are coming down to earth. I believe, I'm aware of that objection. But see, you guys, if you say that, you're not really getting the point. Let me ask it like this. Weren't all the angels originally good? We believe that the angels fell, but they weren't created fallen. They were all created to serve God and in heaven. And what's the point? If God's original purpose for the angels is that they do not marry, because they're certainly not, here's the question. Would He have created them with the ability to procreate? Now think about humans. Humans are designed for marriage. It was His purpose that we marry. And as a result, or as according to God's purpose, we were given the ability to procreate. So here's what I'm saying. If the angels in heaven were not designed or not intended by God to marry, and that all of the wicked angels originally were good angels, obviously it was never God's purpose for any of them to marry. And if they're not married, or say it like this, if they are not intended to marry by God, then guess what? Why in the world would you think that God gave them the plumbing needed for procreation? Humans were purposed by God to marry, therefore they have the proper plumbing. But angels who were not purposed to be married, that's what you guys are saying after all. These are wicked angels, so they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and yet God gave them the mechanisms to actually do something He never intended them to do, because they don't have bodies in the first place. But nevertheless, you say, but wait a minute, these angels became men. So that's the next objection. Well, they got the plumbing once they become men. Well, here's the problem. You know that that's very speculative. Now, in the Bible, we see servant angels of God sometimes taking the appearance of men. There ain't no doubt about that. Now, just off the top of my head, as I'm saying it here, I don't recall wicked angels doing that, or where it's obvious that they're wicked. Now, maybe somebody correct me on that, but I don't recall one. Nevertheless, the point is still going to be this. The very fact that angels can sometimes appear as men, well, they're not men, and that doesn't mean that they were actually... It's not the same thing as an incarnation. It's not like the Son of God becoming a man, living His life as a man, appearing as a man. That just requires speculation on you guys' part as to that they could actually carry on a life in or on the earth doing what man could do. See, it's just speculation. And I'm going to show you in just a little bit that it's not even needed. But here's the other thing. If you are going to say, well, the angels became men, then how do you explain, or how do you make up for the fact that a part of this theory is that the giants, at least for a lot of people that have this theory, are, in fact, these hybrid angel-human offspring? If the angels become men, and that's your explanation for how they could procreate, and by the way, let me just say this, I don't believe that this is some fellowship breaker issue. I just find it a very unreasonable interpretation, okay? So don't take my fervency as dislike for you guys that take this position. I'm just saying I find it highly unneeded, unbiblical, and unreasonable, but nevertheless, and highly speculative as a part of that. So, if your answer to the objection that angels weren't designed to marry and thus wouldn't have the plumbing, well, they become men. Well, if they become men, then why would that account for the fact that they have these giant offspring? Because as the theory is, the angel offspring are giants, in fact, are these different kinds of humans because of the angels procreating. But if the angels become men, why would the offspring not just be humans? Because that's, in fact, that procreation takes place with the human DNA. But what it sounds like people are saying is that now when angels become human, somehow you have this hybrid DNA that they have in their bodies. I mean, how much speculation would that require? That an angel becoming incarnate, and yet his blood, his DNA is somehow still a little bit more than human. I mean, the angel's going to become human or he's not. How would you account for, without any biblical text, that an angel would become a human and yet still somewhat be half human, half angel? After all, every part of Jesus' humanity was in fact humanity. Even if he was deity, even if he had two natures, his human nature was still just human. Well, you would say, well, it's just these offspring are just hybrid creatures, so there must have been something special about these angels once they become men. You see how much speculation that takes? And completely unnecessary. But here's the other question that I have. Let's go. Actually, let me go to my Bible now. When this happens, when the sons of God marries the daughters of men, and the Lord says here, what does he say? My spirit shall not strive with man forever. You notice the focus of the Lord's rebuke is on humanity, not on angels. He doesn't say with man and angels. How dare they do this? It's just men. But surely God has to recognize that the angels came down and kind of created problems here. But it's a focus on man. The Lord was sorry here that he had made man. Not that he had made angels. He's just talking about humanity on the earth. You see, there's no recognition from God that these were actually angels. That certainly doesn't help that interpretation. Here's the other thing. Notice what it says. After daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Now you think about this. Before angels become men, evidently, they see that these women are beautiful. Is it really the case that spirits, who don't even have DNA, don't have hormones in the first place, before they become men anyway, can look upon a completely different type of creature and see beauty? You may say, well, that's what it says. Well, it doesn't say they were angels, so that's what we're asking about. And if they can, well, maybe you would say that they became men already and they were already doing things on the earth. Okay, let me ask this question. Why did they marry the women? Obviously, these angels are concerned with their physical desires, to keep it clean. But why does the rebellious angels, who are not doing what they're supposed to do in the first place, if what they're interested in is the beauty of the women, why are they concerned with marrying the women? I mean, here they are, completely going out of the realm that God created them for. They're becoming men and procreating with women. That's rebellion. But they had enough propriety to marry the women. Why would they be concerned about marriage? I mean, even people today, even humans today, who are just concerned about their desire, physical desires, they don't bother with marriage. I mean, you know that is a fact. I mean, if that's all they're concerned with, they don't, even men, when that's all they're interested in is the beauty of women, they don't concern themselves with marrying. That's the last thing they want to do, in fact. So it's very odd that these angels who are just interested in the beauty of women saw it proper enough to marry them. Are they concerned about fornication? I mean, they're not supposed to be doing this kind of thing in the first place. Do you see all the many problems and how much speculation is required to defend that position? But I got a better interpretation here. Because the other question you have to ask is, why all of a sudden in Genesis 6 does it bring in the fact that angels become married to women? And then just kind of leave that subject. Now, the first thing I want to say is in reference to the giants, the Nephilim, it does not necessarily say that they were the offspring of these marriages. It could have been. It depends. A lot of people struggle with exactly how it's to be translated. But it says, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men of old, men of renown. And depending on how you translate this, it doesn't necessitate that these are actually just came about after these marriages and the angels procreated. This is not necessarily the case. Now, some people can make the case, I suppose, but that's not really a big deal to me, but it doesn't necessitate that. But what's really happening here? Let's go back and see if we can get some idea. First of all, let's look at some context. Now, I want to take you back to Genesis chapter 4. Now, Genesis chapter 3 is about the fall. This is where Adam and Eve fall. They sin, and you get the fall of humanity. All right, so then we get into chapter 4. It says, now the man, Adam, had relations with his wife, Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Again, she gave birth to his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Okay, so we're familiar with this, right? I want you to notice something. She says, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Now, I want you to remember that as we go along here. Why would she make the statement about getting a man-child? Well, skip ahead a little bit. In verse 17, it says this. Let me drop my image there. Oh, no, I gotta go here. Okay, what does it say? Cain had, verse 17 now, Cain had, because this is after Cain kills Abel, and Cain is sent out from the Lord. Notice that. Perhaps I should have added that in the context. But notice in the context, after Cain murders Abel, that God cast him out on his own. Cain had, and then verse 17, Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch after the name of his son. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of, and then it goes on. And notice it says here, and he had a Lamech. Lamech is here. He was the father of Lamech, an offspring of Cain. And this says here, Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, he was the first to take 2 wives. It's the first on record. Notice that. Cain's descendant, Lamech, was the first to take 2 wives in the biblical record, which was not God's ideal for marriage. It became accepted until Christ came, but it was not his ideal. We know that from Jesus' teaching in Matthew 19:9. Matthew 19, when he talks about marriage. But nevertheless, it goes on. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed, for I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. Okay, I'm not so much concerned about what he's talking about there, but obviously he claims it was self-defense. All right, so then you have more killing here by Lamech. Okay, then notice the shift in verse 25. You had descendants of Cain. Okay, and then verse 25, Adam had relations with his wife, and she gave, the focus of the camera is out because I don't have it on auto. That's all right for now. I don't have it on manual. Anyway, so Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. For she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. Okay, now it's going to talk about the lineage of Seth. Now think about this. Why does she say, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel? Well, you notice earlier, I told you to take note of it, where she says, with the help of the Lord, I have gotten a man-child. The indication here is that Eve gave birth to a lot of females, but not too many males. Now, we know that Cain is marrying his sisters. And I don't want to get into that issue. Obviously, their genetics were absolutely ideal because they had recently been created by God. So that wasn't a problem, intermarriage with your close descendants. Nevertheless, I don't want to get into that issue, but obviously he had wives. And there was other wives. And by the way, this statement is not necessarily like sometime later, like way after many children of Cain. It doesn't necessarily say it's at that time. It could have been earlier on, after the death of Abel. But it's evident, it seems, as is most likely the case here from the reading, that there was a lot of females born, but there wasn't too many men. But when Abel died, you had Cain, and he went out and he had family and descendants, but it wasn't just his lineage, because God gave her another offspring in place of Abel, which indicates someone to continue on a better lineage. Okay? And then that's what happens. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Notice, then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Now up here in the lineage of Cain, now we know he's a murderer. Okay, and he was never humble about it. But he goes off. He has a family, descendants. They start polygamy, which wasn't ideal. You have people killing each other. That doesn't mean there was never any good or decent people in the mix. But notice the line of Seth. It says, then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. In other words, in Seth's lineage, you had more godly people, in general, at the least. And so I want to go back to my Bible now, because that gets us into Genesis chapter 6. So now we see a context. And now it says, now it came about when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. You see what's happening? You had the lineage of Seth, which in general from the text seemed to be more godly. And then you had the lineage of Cain, which was going to be separate. But what happens is, most likely that the sons of God are the sons of God in the same sense you see in the New Testament, where, at least close to it, where they're the more godly people. But they see the daughters of men in reference to ungodly men, just men that are not following God, from the families that came about from Cain, and they began to marry them because of their beauty. And what happens when you get a lot of intermarrying with ungodly people? It corrupts the godly people. That's usually the case. You know it's mostly the case. It just seems to be the case that the people that are supposed to be the better influence, when they marry bad people or people from bad families, it's the good people that become corrupted. Now that's a general statement, of course, but that's what's happening. And as they married, the ungodliness of Cain's family spread until it was almost the whole earth, until you get to Noah, who's from the descent of Seth. So they began to multiply, intermarried, and then what happens is you have a corrupted world, because the ungodly influence of the wicked people has influenced most of the earth, however large the population was. Now what about these Nephilim? Whoever they were mighty men, probably soldiers, or not necessarily soldiers, but men that were very powerful and able to throw their weight around. Because what the Lord sees is, as it goes on, now the earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. If you have all these large men, who wherever they came from, and we're talking giants, 9 feet, 10 foot tall, like Goliath. And what do we know about Goliath? They're able to throw their weight around. And so there's a lot of violence going on in the earth because there's a lot of corrupted people. Now notice that these are the records of the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his time. Noah walked with God, and then he talks about his family. So is this not most likely the case? That the godliness had become corrupted through the intermarriage with the ungodly people. And that's what it's trying to tell you. That's why there's not a focus on angels by God. That's why the Lord doesn't concern himself with the angels, because we're talking about humans here. Now, that makes a whole lot more sense. But I'm just going to tell you this also. Who was this written by? Of course, you know that it was written by Moses. Who's Moses writing to? You know, the original audience of Moses' writings were the Israelites. Okay, they're the first and for many centuries the only audience of what we call the Tanakh, the Old Testament Scriptures. It was written primarily to them. It wasn't written, the Old Testament writings were not written to disperse around the world until the Christ came. God was sending a message. Everything that's written in the Tanakh, the Old Testament Scriptures, is primarily there for the Israelite people. Now we know what Moses is doing. He's through God. God through Moses is building a nation. It's going to take that nation. It's going to make it a special nation for future purposes of bringing the Messiah into the world. You think about Genesis chapter 1. Why is Genesis chapter 1 there? You know that Genesis chapter 1 talks about God creating everything. Why? Because Israelites had such a big problem with idolatry. And the land into which they were entering and the lands from which they came, Egypt, were pagan and polytheistic. They had all kinds of gods. This was everywhere around Israel. So what God is wanting to do is instill in His people that there is one true God who created all things. That's why they have Genesis chapter 1. He wants them to know how humanity became corrupted. That's why you had the fall. You see, these things Moses' writing was primarily written for Israel. Not to say that it doesn't benefit us. It absolutely does. But as God is preparing for Israel to enter the promised land, what does He continually tell them not to do? Do not learn the ways of the heathens, because it's for these reasons that I'm kicking them out. That's why you have stories like this. He's trying to tell them what corrupted humanity in the first place. So I got some references for you. For example, we have Exodus 34, verse 15. When he says, notice this, be sure to observe what I am commanding you. This is Moses speaking to Israel. Behold, I am going to drive out the Amorite before you, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Watch yourself that you make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land into which you are going, or it will become a snare in your midst. But rather, you are to tear down their altars, and smash their sacred pillars, and cut down their Asherim. For you shall not worship any other god, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Now notice this. Otherwise you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they would play the harlot with their gods, and sacrifice to their gods, and someone might invite you to eat of his sacrifice, and you might, here it is, take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlots with their gods, and you know that's exactly what happened. But God is trying to tell them about the dangers of that already that happened originally. That's why the story is there. But the Israelites don't need to worry about angels becoming men and procreating with women. No, they need to worry about marrying from bad families and being corrupted. There's a lot of this in their text. Let's see, Deuteronomy 7. When the Lord your God brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites and these others, and when the Lord your God delivers them from before you, and you defeat them, you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, and show no favor to them. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn away your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. You see, God had already told them about what happened in history, that's what happened to the earth. Because he knows that's going to happen to them, and he's telling them beforehand. Okay. How about Joshua 23? If you ever go back, now this is after they began their conquest. Moses is gone now. If you ever go back and cling to the rest of these nations, these which remain among you, and intermarry with them, so that you associate with them and they with you, know with certainty that the Lord your God will not continue to drive these nations out from before you, but they will be a snare and a trap to you, and a whip on your sides and thorns in your eyes. You see, it was a big problem God knew it was going to be, and so God was telling them in their own human history what had happened originally. Okay, Judges 3. Then the sons of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, and these others, and they took their daughters, exactly what God told them not to do, for themselves as wives, and gave their own daughters to their sons, and served their gods. The sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Ezra 9. This is exactly what happened in the time of Ezra, way later. Okay, but for time's sake, how about 1 Kings 11? Oh, yeah, I know you're familiar with this story. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, and it goes on. Notice what it says. From the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, you shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods. Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Talks about his idolatry. Yeah, you know, I've come to the conclusion of what I wanted to present. It's kind of a short presentation, but I just wanted to hit home with this. God knew the problems that they were going to face. Moses wrote these things about human history because what God is telling them is that, don't you see? You look in human history, when God destroyed most of the world, it was after a lot of intermarrying between the godly, at least generally speaking, of the lineage and descendants of Seth with the descendants of Cain. And the intermarriage eventually corrupted the whole family. And until you had Noah left, and then God wiped out humanity, starting afresh. And that's the point of why, leading up to the flood, you had the story about the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. Because it's trying to tell you the intermarriage of the Sethites and the Canaanites. Just remember that you have this language where she says, with the help of the Lord, I have a man-child born to me. And then with Abel, or rather with Seth, she says, this is a replacement offspring instead of Abel. Because you had Abel and Cain, and evidently, most clearly, you had lots of other females, because these are whom they married, at least Cain. But the point is, she didn't have many men. But when you had Seth, he started his own descendants, and then he had some males, and then it says men began to call upon the name of the Lord, meaning from his descendants. But then you had the intermarriage. Why? Because of the beauty. Well, that's what the Israelites are doing. And it corrupted them every time they did it. That's why God has that account there. It has nothing to do with angels becoming men. There's a lot of speculation that is required to even defend that position. Now, as I said, I don't consider that some fellowship breaker. I mean, if you want to believe that, I think you got a lot of problems with that. And I just don't think it's very careful exegesis of the biblical text. And I think what that's going to demonstrate is that you're going to have very flawed exegesis with a lot of other biblical texts. So, anyway, I believe that's a much more reasonable interpretation. But nevertheless, in maybe record time, that's going to be a very short presentation. But we weren't live. But just remember that I am returning live July 8th. It'll be a debate, and it will be live. You'll be able to ask questions. Same time for the Bible reasoning program as always. And, you know, for those of you who do like to tune in for the live program, I appreciate you so much. And I'm sorry I couldn't be live, but just the way of it. Nevertheless, hope this was helpful. Thank you, and God bless.
Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away, got to fly away. To a home on God's celestial shore, I'll fly away, got to fly away.